Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Mahdi Rouhiathar. First of all, I should just express my thanks to ICSLS guys for just giving me the opportunity to present my research paper. As you can see the name, I try to develop a writing strategy based on Oxford Strategy Self-Regulated Model of Language Learning. I'm going just to explain the model later on, but first of all, let me just talk about my co-researcher too, Ms. Arezu Rouhiathar, who is an English teacher working in Iran. To introduce myself, I'm actually a teacher, an EFL teacher in one of the colleges in Oman, Salale, to be more exact. The university is called University of Technology and Applied Sciences, and besides teaching, I'm actually doing lots of research. I'm just currently doing 2 approved internally funded research. I also act as a sort of research facilitator, and one of my areas of interest is self-regulation. I've published some articles in this regard, so the current article is closely related to the idea of self-regulation. So let me go to the first part of my research, which is related to the foundations, the theoretical foundations, and the previous findings. Language learning strategies is a field that began due to the a revival of interest in the language learner. Actually, there was too much emphasis on teacher, so as a reaction to this, the different practitioners tried to focus on the language learner himself or herself, so that way to see how the learning is happening. At the same time, we had some theoretical foundations regarding the definition of competence. One of the elements of which was actually strategic competence. So language learning strategies are closely related to that idea. Different aspects of this, movement have been researched. I don't want to mention all of them, but let's focus on the one that I'm going just to explain. You can see the list of the aspects which have been investigated throughout the history of language learning strategies. Here I'm just going to focus on strategies for learning one specific skill, which is writing. At the same time, I'm going to develop a new measure of writing strategies, something which is quite different from the previous ones. So these are the 2 aspects that I'm going just to focus on, but let me just talk about the taxonomies for language learning strategies. Actually, we have general taxonomies and we have specific ones. The general taxonomies or inventories try to address the general strategies. We have different attempts actually. So Oxford's attempt 1990, that's a sort of very famous one, which tried to divide actually language learning strategies into direct, indirect ones, further subdivided into, let's say, cognitive, metacognitive, and so on, was widely used actually. So later on, we had different attempts regarding, let's say, specific inventories targeting different language skills and areas. The one that I just mentioned in this slide is Wang, 2005, who tried just to, develop a kind of writing strategy. When we reviewed the related literature, we came across, 2 or 3 weak points in this regard. Actually, one of them is that, we have an obvious lack of focus on writing strategies. I don't know why, but maybe one of the reasons is that people think that, okay, there is a sort of similarity between L1 and L2 writing. So doesn't matter, you know, when you're a very good writer in L1, so it means that you're going to be a very good writer in L2 automatically. So there is no need to focus on some specific strategies. They are just directly transferred from L1 to L2. But you know, formally, we defined writing strategy as a kind of thing which is, you know, closely related to the writer's engagement in different steps of writing process. As you can remember, that we have different steps, for example, planning, composing, revising, and other writing related activities. So different taxonomy developers try to focus on the different strategies for each of these steps, actually. So we had that kind of process writing movement. So actually the strategies were viewed as a kind of technique, approach, or tactic which was used to control the online management of the goals. And maybe, you know, it was used as a sort of make-up strategy to overcome a kind of limitation related to you know, learners' cognitive capacity resources. So writing strategy could help the writers to write more effectively. So you know, the strategies in general are used in order to, you know, overcome the problems that you might have or the insufficiencies. So again, when we just review the literature, we can see that, you know, we have different kinds of classifications regarding writing strategies, and they were quite confusing. I have mentioned some of them here, so I don't want to review them all, but there is a kind of confusion, you know. Some of the people focused on, you know, planning strategies, the other ones focus on planning strategies and regard the other strategies. So there is a kind of confusion. The second thing is that, you know, most of the developers, I mean, those taxonomy developers, try to resort to think aloud protocol analysis or observations in order to, you know, develop writing strategy taxonomies. So they lack a sort of strong, you know, firm theoretical background. So this was the second weakness, actually. Actually, Kanju, as I mentioned, tried to overcome this problem by making lists of, you know, taxonomies across different categories. For example, planning with different authors, something like that. Let me directly go to the objectives of my own study, actually. You know, this is the first time that a person resorts to Oxford's reformulation of language learning strategies. You know that, you know, Oxford's model in, you know, developed 1919 was widely used by different people, wanted just to assess the learner's language learning strategies. But later on, he reformulated his, her former model, published a kind of book, a very influential one, I think, 2011, and later on it was just edited and published again 2017. So the name of the model is Strategic Self-Regulated Model of Language Learning. So what's the difference between this model and the former models? You know, actually in this model we have a kind of marriage between self-regulation and strategy. That is the basic thing. So why is it a sort of positive point here? Because, you know, there was much criticism about the construct validity of, you know, strategy. I mean, for example, how do you define a strategy? How do you operationally define a strategy? So there was much criticism about the definition. So actually Oxford tried to overcome this problem by, you know, combining these two ideas, I mean, strategies and self-regulation. So in a model, we can see a comprehensive treatment of different strategies. Formerly, we had some attention to cognitive strategies and metacognitive strategies to some extent, but she included two other domains too. I mean, the strategies related to effective and meta-effective dimensions, and also she included social cultural interactive and meta-social cultural interactive dimensions too. So these are the positive things about her model, a kind of comprehensive one. So if you want just to, you can see the definition of the self-regulation. It is quite, common, so you can just see it in other ones too. So let us just move to the research questions directly. I wanted to validate a questionnaire, a survey. So the basic question was, related to the data. So does the questionnaire data significantly support the proposed self-regulated writing strategy, abbreviated into SRWS model? So this is the general question. So we wanted to see whether the data or the model suggested or proposed actually fits the data well or not. Is it a kind of validated, let's say, questionnaire or not? So we went through a kind of validation process. I'm going just to explain it later on. So you can see the follow-up questions. Each follow-up question is related to one of the constituents of the model. So we have 6 constituents actually. So we have cognitive, metacognitive, effective, meta-effective, social cultural interactive, and meta-social cultural interactive. So the follow-up questions are actually related to those components. Now, let's come to the methodology. So in the methodology, actually, I have adopted a kind of design which is suitable to develop a kind of questionnaire or survey. So it is of descriptive nature. Evidently, it is non-experimental, and it is of a correlational sort of design. So I intended to develop and validate a new self-report measure for validly assessing L2 learners' awareness of writing strategies. So actually, if I want to go into more details, so the process included, first of all, a kind of item pool development for each subscale. The book written by Rebecca Oxford was just a major source, but I reviewed all the literature. That way, I try to find out the items which can be used in my temporary questionnaire. So I prepared the first version of the instrument. I used the experts' points of view. I tried to pilot that questionnaire by just actually administering it to a small sample consisting of 30 people, and I tried to design the final version on the basis of that piloting expert viewpoints. And then I administered that final version in order to see whether the model suggested fits the data well or not. So we just went through a kind of validation process. The subjects or the participants of this study were chosen from different universities in Iran. So in order to have a sort of normal distribution, I tried to include all the characteristics related to sex, age range, proficiency levels. These are actually determined by a kind of demographic session in the questionnaire itself. So you can see the distribution across different sexes, age range and proficiency levels. So that is a kind of self-claimed proficiency level, not a kind of standard one. And then you can see the other descriptive measures here. So the total number was 384, which is just in correspondence with most of the statistics which are just mentioned or accepted in the field by the experts. So let me go to the instrument and material. I briefly talked about it. So I had, let's say, 6 components. You can see it in the table, A, B, C, D, E, F. Those dimensions of, let's say, self-regulation model. So the questionnaire consisted of, let's say, 2 subcategories, some specific questions, which comprise, let's say, 156 items, and some general questions, which were derived to just ask for, let's say, personal details. So this table shows the distribution of the questionnaire items across different constituents. So that questionnaire was actually administered. So you can see that the reliability estimates from Bach alpha are quite acceptable because they are well above 0.7. So you can see the number of the questions for each one in this table. So it shows that it was quite a kind of reliable, let's say, measure. I tried to answer 2 questions, 2 major questions in the data analysis. The first question was related to the one whether observed variables measure what they were intended to measure in the model. So this question is closely related to the validity of the observed variables. So the second question was related to reliability. How accurately do observed variables measure latent variables in the research? So that way, we try to deal with the reliability of the explicit variables intended to measure the latent variables. To answer the questions, the loading of each item on the relevance construct, okay, should have the significant t-value at the significance level of 0.5. This means that the value should be between 1.96, positive 1.96 and negative 1.96. So it is worthy of note that the factor loading of each item on the relevant construct should be above 0.5. So in this table, you can see that, the items which were below that critical value, which is 0.5, so some items were excluded from the from the final version after that sort of validation. And of course, we had another one. So in this study, CFA, confirmatory factor analysis, was carried out on the questionnaire item, the question with factor loading over 0.5 and t-values over 1.96 were considered to accurately measure the predicted variables in the questionnaire. So you can see the information in this data. So these are the 25 questions were excluded after observing the factor loadings. Actually, when we come to AVE, so we have some other measures, and you can see that all of them are well above 0.5 or 0.6, which are quite acceptable. So you can see that all the constituents actually enjoy high levels or high, let's say, estimates. Now, when we come to the major one, the goodness of fit values, GOF values, you can see that all of the estimates in the table are well above 0.7. So that means that all of them actually enjoy that kind of construct validity, convergent validity, and divergent validity too. So let me just now focus on how these data and how these findings can be interpreted. This study was unprecedented. Why? Because it was the first time that somebody used Rebecca Oxford's a new model, I mean strategic self-regulated model of language learning in order to develop writing strategy. So it has a sort of firm theoretical background, something that the other ones may not, may not have, enjoyed actually. So it was a kind of comprehensive, model comprising all the dimensions. I mean, for example, we had cognitive, metacognitive, effective, meta-effective, let's say social cultural interactive and meta-social cultural interactive strategies. So we devise a kind of classification of writing strategies which would give justice to the full range of strategies learners may fall back upon when writing in English. So it is in line with Vygotsky's idea of self-regulated language learning. So when we want just to train autonomous learners, self-regulated learners, so this model, the proposed model and the corresponding questionnaire can be, in line with what Vygotsky suggested. So here we have a brief reference to those self-regulated language learning strategies, So we have planning, for example, conceptualizing with details, conceptualizing broadly, monitoring, evaluating. These are the dimensions of self-regulation. So the strategies in the final version included all of these, elements of self-regulation. So we had a sort of hierarchy of interrelationship between observed variables, the questionnaire items, and latent variables at different levels. Those constituent levels of, strategic self-regulated model. So we have that construct, which comprised 6 components, and the final product was a kind of 131 item questionnaire, which was well validated using confirmatory factor analysis. This survey or this inventory can be used as a sort of self-assessment instrument, by the learners. So the learners can see whether they are, aware of the strategies across different dimensions. For example, have they ever employed meta-effective strategies while writing, something like that. So it can be used as a kind of consciousness-raising activity, awareness-raising activity. And it is in line with the whole multidimensional learner. Should pay attention to all the things, not just cognitive or metacognitive aspects, but also, you should pay attention to the effective and social cultural interactive dimensions too. So this strategy, this kind of writing strategy can be the beginning stage when you want to employ a kind of strategies-based instruction. So, the first thing you should do is just to, administer that questionnaire to see whether the students are aware of the strategies or not. So it can act as a sort of the first stage in strategies-based instructions. Teachers can just use this questionnaire in order to make their students aware of the kinds of strategies that they can use. They may use some kinds of strategies, but they may neglect the other dimensions. Let me just talk about some of the implications. In Iran, actually, we have some teacher training. I've been acting as sort of teacher trainer for such a long time. There have been many, let's say, in-service programs. So this questionnaire can give an idea about, a kind of workshop designed by, teacher trainers in order to make the English teachers, language learners aware of the possible, let's say, strategies that they can just use in their own class in order to make the students aware of this. Of course, material developers, those who want to develop materials, can also use this strategy in order just to design lessons and materials. Test developers can use the same thing actually. So I'm just going quickly through the slides because we are just supposed to talk not more than 30 minutes. So actually, this developed questionnaire can be a sort of data collection instrument in other studies. So, other people, other researchers can use them to see whether, the same items can be validated or not. So, if I want to talk about in the last phase of my, presentation, if I want to talk about future studies, I have just let's say administered a questionnaire in Iran, and that number, 384 participants just responded to the questionnaire. So other researchers in future can focus on other, population samples with different characteristics across different ages, across different proficiency levels, and with different social cultural backgrounds. So to see whether the same questionnaire can be validated or not. So the questionnaire is a kind of instrument to elicit the respondents' tendencies regarding general strategy behavior. So the future attempts can focus on task-based strategies. We have different writing tasks, so there can be corresponding, questionnaires related to different writing tasks. Actually, I want just to do it as quickly as possible because, we just approached that limitation of time. So in future, there can be some attempts to include all the factors. Individual learner differences, situational and social factors, and learner strategies and language learning outcomes. So there can be kind of combination of these factors. I hope that you enjoyed listening to me, and it can just it can be a kind of insightful, presentation for you to just resort to, the same model, to develop different kinds of taxonomies in future. Thank you very much for your attention, and again, I thank you all the guys in the conference to give me the opportunity to present such a thing. Thank you very much. Have a nice time. I wish you all the best.